In a previous video, we looked at the basics of setting up a new custom element. The purpose of that video really was to look at the steps involved without getting confused with what the custom element was doing aside from saving and retrieving data from content. In this video, what I wanted to look at was the custom elements API in terms of observing changes in elements within your content items so that you can react to those, whether that's for integration with a third party or perhaps you want to change some specific pieces of information on that content item. You can find information about the custom elements API on the Kontent.ai document site, so that's docs.content.ai. And if you see from this page here, we can click on the various different things that are available and read a bit more information. Specifically on this video, we're going to be looking at the observe element changes method. What this does is we register to see when an element changes while we're editing it, and the custom element API will react to that and allow us to call a delegate to do something. I've got a bit of code, so we can see here what I've got. I'm not going to go over things like the values and disabled sizes, updates, etc. We did those in another video, and I will leave a link to that in the description below. The key bit of this video really is that we have a tag here, which is just a pre-tag. That's going to take some output, and we've also got an event handler and delegate here to deal with the custom element firing when its value changes. What I will say about this custom element is that I have not loaded the value back out of content. So when we see it working, there will be no values loading when we reload the custom element. We start from scratch every single time. All this is going to do, you can see pretty much from the code, is we are going to take the element name and the element value, and we're going to write that out into a list on the screen so that we can see what's happening and see what the values that have changed are. It's a really simple piece of code, but let's go and see it in action. We'll also take a look at some of the things that maybe could catch you out. Let's take a look. So here's content. All we can see is my example from the last video I did for simple text. We can see that we've only got this one custom element type. That was our simple text type. So we're gonna create a new one. So let's go to the content model. We're going to create a new type, and I'll call this observer. And we're going to add 3 fields to this. We're going to have a title. We're going to have a URL slug, and that's going to be generated by the title. And last but not least, we're going to have our custom element, and I'm just going to call this observer. We've got a URL for this. As I mentioned, we're on HTTPS, so we'll pop that in. I called it observer.html. And the important thing here is that we specify which fields we want to look at. The available things in this drop down are title and URL slug. And if you remember the code that we had open a few moments ago, we've got a title and a URL slug here. Those are the element code names that we're going to be looking at. So we need to mirror that in the way that we set up the custom element. So what I will do here is we'll just go back and we will select both of those. Save our changes. We now have a content type that's going to use our new custom element. So let's go and add one of those in. Okay, so we'll create new. It's going to be the observer, and we'll call this observer test. I don't know why I've got caps lock on. It's a very shouty test. And there we go. So everything has updated, and we can see down here, we set the title, and then not long after that, the URL slug was updated. If we change this title again, and let's say new, then we can see the URL slug gets updated after the title is updated. So there's a clear chain of events that happen here that are kicked off. Now, what's interesting is obviously this URL slug is being done by content. The observer is done by us in the custom element. And here's maybe first and the most important gotcha, I think, for custom elements that are using element observers. And to prove this, we're going to go and look at the content model again. So let's go into the content model. Let's go into the observer, and we're going to add a new content group. Let's call this one main. Okay, so here's our new content group. That's popped all of these fields in there. I'm going to take the URL slug and the observer, and I'm going to add them into their new own content group, and we'll call it navigation. That's a good name. In we go. So now we've got navigation, URL slug and observer, and the main field there. If we just quickly take a look at the observer, there are a couple of things going on. In fact, actually, let's start with the URL slug. The URL slug, as we said, it's generated from the title field. We can see that. The observer, however, if you remember, we set this up to look at the title in the URL. Title has now disappeared from the elements that we're allowed to read. The reason for this is that the custom element only works within the context of the content group. So if it's not in this tab, the custom element's not going to do anything. If the custom element isn't loaded, it won't do anything. So you have to actually look at that custom elements content group in order for it to fire. And we can see this in action. So if I save these changes and go back over to the content itself, the first thing we can see is my observer test. There's my title, there's my navigation values, that's all there. Now, I've got Postman set up to retrieve some data from this content item. So if I just switch over to that, we can have a look. Okay, so this is a really simple query in the preview API. You can see here that we've got the title, we've got the URL slug, and whatever the value is that's stored in the observer itself. So if we go back to content, we can take a look at what it's doing. I'm just going to go back in from scratch because it will reset the value. If I change the title to new value, what will have happened here is we've made a change, but we're not on this content group. This content group isn't open yet. We haven't looked at it, we haven't loaded it, we haven't done anything. If I go back to Postman and run this query again, what we can see is that new value is set for the URL slug and the title, but you'll notice that the actual value for the observer has not been set. It's not been loaded. If we go in here, it's still not going to get set because nothing's changed. It doesn't know what's happened. I can change the value in here. I don't know. Wow, good typing. I can change the value here, and you can see that it changes, it updates, and the observer's recording it. We go back to Postman and run it again. Do it a different way, but there we go. So there's our new slug coming through. It's really important to remember that, especially depending on the use cases of what you're doing with your custom element. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out, if we go and revert this back to maybe the previous version, so let's get rid of those groups. We will go into the observer. Let's just go to navigation. Let's pop these two back in main and get rid of that. Yeah, let's just all keep it in one content group because it makes life a little bit easier. Okay, so here's our observer test. You can see there it's all fine. It's now going to do exactly what we need it to do. There's the title getting updated, and we need to actually relink that to the title because it'll become a custom thing. So the other thing I wanted to look at once we've got that model back is actually the importance of this field here. You'll notice it's gone back to title and URL slug because those two things are now both in the same content group. So sneakily they were always working, or certainly always registered the same way, but we couldn't see title because it was in a different tab. But if you don't have those registered, and this is just a quick thing you need to check, when you're looking at your content, and we'll open the developer tools to show this, you can see the minute I change something here, we start getting some errors. And the errors in here in the console, I don't know if you can read them, they are quite small, but they're quite clear. They tell us what's going on. There is no title and there is no URL slug that we can read because we don't have permission to actually access those things. So if all you need to do is go back onto there and just make sure, if you're not getting the changes you expect to get, that the right elements are selected here and here. And that's it. So hopefully you find that useful. If you've got any questions about custom elements, you can always check out the documentation on docs.content.ai. Drop a note in the comments on this video below and I will do my best to answer that. If I can't answer it, then obviously we can reach out to the team at Content and see what they can tell us. In another video, what I'm going to look at is how you can retrieve information about the content item in a custom element. There are a couple of ways to do that, and there are a couple of reasons why you're going to want to do that. So we'll quickly run through those, and then you'll know what you're doing.